Welcome to the Reawakening Ancient Feminine Wisdom in Pregnancy, Birth, and Motherhood Summit. I'm your host, Nancy Lucina, and today we have with us Julia Jones. Julia is a postnatal doula leading a worldwide renaissance in the way we care for newborn mothers. She has created a new paradigm for postpartum care by merging traditional medicine and culture with cutting-edge research on hormones and neurology. She is the author of Nourishing Newborn Mothers, Ayurvedic Recipes to Heal Your Mind, Body, and Soul After Childbirth, and creator of a worldwide leading education resource for postpartum professionals, Newborn Mothers Collective. Today, Julia and I discuss many fascinating things about the postpartum period and how we can be better prepared as mothers to enter into this period. Hello and welcome everyone. Today I have with me Julia Jones from newbornmothers.com. Welcome, Julia. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You are such an earth angel. That's the first word that came to me when I just recently got to know you online and checked out a couple of your offerings, took one of your free courses, which I highly recommend. And yeah, you're just helping mothers and birth professionals to care for mothers in such a profound way. So I want to thank you to start out with, because that's such incredible work you're doing. And I'd love if we could start by you sharing how our modern world sabotages Mother Nature's plan for postpartum.
Whoa, that's a big question. There's so many ways.
We don't have that much time, so I know we're going to get the short version. But
yeah, you'll get the short version. So I really work in two main areas. What happened was I trained as an Ayurvedic postpartum doula, so I studied traditional Indian medicine and postpartum care. And I was really interested in traditional medicine and culture around the world and how they support postpartum. But then when I had my own baby, I realized it wasn't enough. There was still something missing. It was a beautiful start, but it just didn't feel like it was all of the answers. It didn't feel complete. And it was actually at a training seminar, a sort of conference that I went to with a pediatrician and lactation consultant called Christina Smiley. And she introduced me to this idea of baby brain. And then that sent me down the rabbit hole of starting to learn about neuroscience and neuroplasticity and hormones and understanding how our brains change when we become mothers. So then really my approach is really about merging those two, like the traditional wisdom, but also with what we know now from, only really in the last few decades about our brains and science. And when I could see it from both sides and put the two together, then it was like a totally different approach than anything I'd ever seen before. And then that's when I started to, really feel like I needed to get this out into the world in a bigger way. So I guess the two main ways, if we look at that, the brain science side of things and the traditional wisdom side of things, the two ways that our modern culture is sort of sabotaging this blueprint for peace and joy that is nature's grand plan. One of them is the lack of cultural support. It's the lack of a village and the lack of rites of passage, and a lack of postpartum care in terms of food and massage and belly binding. There are so many things that all traditional cultures do that we don't do. So that's kind of the traditional culture side. And then over on the brain science side, really the biggest thing that I feel is the mistake that's being made is we are far too much in our cognitive brains. We're thinking about things. We're looking for information and advice. We're really in this like expert paradigm, rather than understanding that sort of this more feminine wisdom is actually much more related to things like intuition, which is like they've studied intuition. They can tell you what happens in your brain, so it's very specific. It's not just I used to get confused when people said, oh, just trust your intuition. And as a first-time mom, I was like, what does that even mean? But when you understand brain science and you go deeper with that kind of thing, then you realize that pretty much everything our culture is doing with all this like information, advice, experts, top down kind of stuff is really stopping women from being confident, from finding the answers within themselves, from tuning into their babies. And really that's the two sides of the coin. That's really why we were running into so many problems.
What do you say to women about the village? Because if they don't have it, if they're living in this more modern family isolated version of reality, which I guess majority of us are, probably most people who are watching this are, what do you think are some steps that they can do to begin to create somewhat of a village? What have you done now that you've learned all of this? You have 3 children, right? So you've kind of learned along the way, and now you're quite versed in all of this. So
I think the very first thing that we really need to change is our mindset, because so many women still, even though they think there's this nice fluffy idea of a village, they still really hold tight to a lot of these deep-seated beliefs that women should be independent, that we should be able to do it all, that we should cope, that other women are coping. We always look at other people from Instagram and Pinterest and from the outside world and think they're doing it. Why can't I? What's wrong with me? So so much of the barriers to building villages, although there are physical challenges, I would say that 80% of the work is in your head. So if someone's watching this and saying, oh, it won't work for me, I really, really challenge you to do the inner work first, and to start thinking about what messages you have received as a woman, as a mother growing up over your lifetime from our culture about doing it all, being it all, having it all. And are those serving you? Are those really helping you, or are they holding you back? Because, as long as we have this mindset, it's impossible to build villages again.
Such a good point. Yeah, it definitely has to happen from within. And I think so many women feel really quite afraid to ask for help nowadays, and even to receive it. I mean, even when it's being given, I find that really quite fascinating. I guess you have seen that a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's to do with the brain science. So ideally, when you have a baby, you get this huge rush of oxytocin, and oxytocin is, it means quick birth. So lots of people just think of it in terms of being the birth hormone, but actually it's the love and bonding hormone. And so it's, naturally it's high during childbirth because your nature wants you to bond with your baby. But its true purpose is the bonding, not the birth. And so if you have a lot of oxytocin, if you think about that bonding with the baby, it will also bond you with your village, so it helps you to build connections with your husband, with your other children, with your extended family, with your neighbors, with playgroups, mums, school mums, and so in terms of reaching out for help and not being too independent, you've got to have the right hormones going on in your head. So if you have low oxytocin, the research has shown that you will be more controlling, more judgmental, more independent, and all of those things will make you less able to ask for help. So again, a lot of what I teach is really about that inner work. So if you can work on your mindset and boost your oxytocin, then the village building actually comes very, very naturally. That's quite easy once you've done the bulk of the work. It's like the iceberg. The bulk of the work happens underneath the surface, on the inside.
Yeah. So if a woman is watching now and she hears what you just said and she feels like, oh, I must have low oxytocin, what do you think a few steps she can take so that she boosts that? Or maybe also speaking to the birth professionals who might be wanting to help a woman like this, excuse me, what could they do to help her?
Yeah, the golden rule that I always teach in all my courses is love conquers all. So if oxytocin is the love hormone, you don't have to be a neuroscientist. You just have to be really focused on love and on I always say, do what brings you peace and joy. So you hear a lot of mums joking about like, oh, I find peace and joy with wine and Netflix. And you know what? If that makes them happy, that's really awesome. Anything that you can do, it doesn't have to be the conventional, like, of course, all the usual self-care kind of things like having a bath, having a massage, meditation, doing exercise, being in the sunshine, breathing fresh air, going to the beach, all of those like traditional self-care things, all are boosting oxytocin if they bring that mother peace and joy. But so are unconventional things. Like if you really love watching Seinfeld, then go and watch Seinfeld and have a good laugh. And that is also boosting your oxytocin. So anything that you love and anything that brings you peace and joy, and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks you should be doing, you know, you are the only person who can really feel inside your body and know what's going to make you happiest in the moment, you know. So again, always you are the expert of your journey, and it's really important that you tune into your body and not do what anyone else tells you. So it's the same as a professional. If you're trying to support a mother to boost her oxytocin, you ask her what brings you most peace and joy. And one of my favorite questions is if a mum says to me like, oh, I think I should have a bath or something, and I'm like, when you think about doing that, does it bring you joy? And she might say, you know what, no, I feel like someone else has told me that that's what I should do. That would be like the good self-care thing to do. Right. What I actually want to do is go to a cafe and stuff my face with chocolate cake and I have an hour reading a trashy magazine without my baby, and I'll be like, awesome, you go do that.
Yeah. Self-care and motherhood is something that's been really present for me lately, because I've been getting a lot of questions from people like, how do I do this? And I think it's because most women feel quite overwhelmed. And when I look back on my young years with my daughter, when my daughter was very young, I basically had her strapped to me like 100% of the time, you know? So I didn't feel like I personally had a whole lot of space for that self-care unless I was doing something that would be caring for myself with her strapped onto me. And that is because I wanted to do things in the attachment parenting way. Now, something that you have mentioned, not on this interview, but something I've heard you say, is that if you go back and research how people were living in ancient times, the mothers weren't holding their babies all the time. So I would love if you could share that with our viewers, because I think that that's a bit misunderstood, and we don't want to be, I think, encouraging women to like never be with their babies, but also how, I don't know, speak to that attachment parenting, how that's playing out. I know you have a lot of things to say to that.
So we have a problem in understanding in our culture that there's actually two things. Attachment theory is the science. Attachment parenting is more of a it's like advice and information, you know. So a lot of the attachment parenting stuff gets mixed up for being like solid evidence, you know. So yes, it's good to extended breastfeed, but traditionally you would have been sharing that role with your sisters, you know. You would have had multiple babies and multiple mothers, and you all would have been breastfeeding each other's children. So, you know, you have to kind of unpack like, so what are your baby's needs? Yes, that's attachment theory, but how do you fulfill them? And it doesn't have to be one mother and one baby doing that all of the time. So in traditional cultures, a woman would only spend 40% of her time with her baby. That's a statistic specifically from a hunter-gatherer tribe called the Ape Pygmy tribe. But again, you can look into, you know, every hunter-gatherer culture tribe that I've looked at spend very, very little time comparatively with their very new babies as we do now. And that's because that's the village. That's the village that's missing. So there was another hunter-gatherer tribe, I can't remember the name now, but the fathers actually spent 50% of their time within arm's reach of their baby. And I thought that was completely amazing. And again, that's cultural. Not all cultures have the dads quite so involved in the very early years, but it did really make me think, like, what a difference would that make if you only spent, you know, 40 or 50% of your time with your baby, and the rest of the time there were other people loving that child. We're not talking about like them being controlled, cried in a cot. We're talking about them being loved and cared for and developing these bonding attachments with multiple adults, not just one mother. So it's really about understanding that yes, the baby has needs, but yes, the mother also have needs, and you can be creative about making sure that both people's needs get met. It's not one or the other.
Yeah. Wow. when I heard you say that, that was really news to me. 40%. I was like,
It's massive. I spend,
what?
even with all my effort, I spend much more than 40% of my time with
Yeah.
my baby. Not so much now he's older, but definitely in that first year.
Mm.
No matter how hard I tried as a modern mother, even, with my parents nearby, my dad hands-on, his dad, my husband.
Yeah.
But then I still, when I looked at that number, 40%, I was like, yeah, I'm still spending way more time than that with my baby.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to get it that low, which is,
Sure.
it's okay. But as long as you feel like you have enough time to take care of your needs, and I always think we need to push the level a little bit up for what we think of as self-care. Self-care is not just sleep, food, water, shelter, bathing, but
Mm-hmm.
actually getting to that next level of having meaning in your life,
Mm-hmm.
meditating, exercising, not just being alive, but actually thriving. So it doesn't
Thriving.
really
Yeah.
count as self-care if it's like, I'm going to die if I don't eat right now. That's not self-care.
Sure.
That's living. So I
Right.
think we need to raise our standards a little bit, and that means we
Yeah.
need to let go of a little bit of control and invite other people into those caring roles with our babies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And letting go of control. For me, I think that's really about moving from the masculine dominated paradigm to the feminine, which I know you talk about a lot, and that's so important to reawaken that. And that's really when we create that kind of sisterhood and that fabric for ourselves so we can lean into other people or other men as well. It's reawakening that feminine wisdom, I think. Talk to us a
Yeah,
little bit,
absolutely.
sorry, talk to us about the 40-day postpartum. So are women like in ancient cultures, even in the first 40 days, are they spending only 40% with their baby, or is that more of a close?
That is more of an intensive time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first 40 days is traditionally in most cultures. Some people say 30 days, and it depends, the specifics change a little bit in different cultures. But in general, the concept is that first month or two is spent almost exclusively with the mother and baby lying in bed,
Mm-hmm.
and not working, not looking after older children, not cooking, not cleaning, but all, I always tell mothers that your only two jobs in that first 6 weeks are falling in love and learning to breastfeed. And so that time is much more spent exclusively with the mother, because you need to obviously spend a lot of hours breastfeeding to establish your milk supply. Mother needs to be resting a lot as well in order to really heal and recover from childbirth, to step into her new role with confidence and with joy, and to bond with her baby as well. So, but then once that first few months has passed, then women would very often return into the culture with a variety of roles. That that's when they could have had roles working, being a wife, doing other things outside of just the mother and baby. So yeah, once that bonding and breastfeeding is established, then that's when the rest of the village kind of steps in with the baby.
How did you, as a new mom, these 3 times you've done it, how did you set that up for yourself to have those 40 days pretty undisturbed? I mean, what are some actually really practical things if someone's watching who's pregnant, for example, and wants to do that for herself? What would you recommend?
The first thing I always recommend is we need a kind of cultural shift, and we need to start seeing postpartum as something that you save up for, a little bit like getting married. So people say to me, I don't have any money, and I'm like, well, it's obviously a little bit late if you're already having your baby, but it would be so much better if anyone is listening to this and they may be planning to have a second child or a third child, so they have maybe time, or maybe if you've just found out you're pregnant, start putting away a little bit of money each week, because that investment in postpartum, any money you spend will come back to you 10 times in energy, in health, in being able to breastfeed, and being more likely to not have postpartum mood disorders. Any money you can invest in that time will, simply in an economic way, it makes a lot of sense. So I think that's really, again, that's a big paradigm shift. And a lot of people watching this might be feeling like, well, it's too late because my baby's due next week, or my baby's already been born and I don't have any money. So if you kind of get to that point, if you do have money, spend it, spend it, spend it. Like, really, again, we have a lot of mindset blocks around feeling like we should be able to do everything. But if you can hire a cleaner, or if you can get some meals delivered, then 100% that is, you know, the best thing you can do with your money is buy yourself time. You know, and if there's any things you can sacrifice, like not buying a new cot but getting a secondhand cot, or you know, a lot of people will buy a new car or move into a new house, and those are significant expenses. So why culturally is that acceptable? But being able to invest in that first 40 days of resting and being rejuvenated is not culturally acceptable. So yes, if you have money, absolutely, yeah, if you have money, spend it on that, and look for ways of saving money. But also, if you know, if money really is a block for you, if it truly is a barrier, then it's really is just about village building. And you know, I would suggest you get in touch with neighbours and school mums, and you can do things like there's some really great online tools. One's called mealbaby.com, where you can set up a meal registry so your friends can bring food. You can also trade childcare and things like that, and you know, like, so if you say, oh, can you have my older kids on this day and I'll have your kids on that day. So there are lots of sort of free ways of doing it as well, but I still think having money it gives you the ultimate freedom, you know. So if you can spend money, do that, and if you can't, then you're just going to have to push through all your mindset blocks and start asking for a lot of help.
Yeah. I would love if you could just emphasize for women how important that 40-day period is. And maybe you could tell us the word, I think I wrote it down here, for that they use in India.
Japa.
Yeah, and just like how when we give ourselves that period, what happens later in life?
Yeah, so my very first teacher was a woman called Isha Oakes, and she taught me this phrase, 40 days for 40 years. And at the time, I didn't necessarily understand it in a really practical sense, but I knew that it was true that in every culture, so in Indian culture, they call it japa, which means a time spent reciting a mantra of devotion, which is so beautiful. You know, in China, they call it the golden month. In England, it was called confinement. You know, so a lot of different cultures have a concept of this 40 days after birth being a unique stage in a woman's life. But then also, when you look at it from a brain science point of view, this is where it gets really exciting. So when you have a baby, your brain plasticity increases, which means that it's preparing for a stage of huge learning and growth, new neural pathways. And so when this plasticity increases, it can be a very overwhelming time. I always tell people it's a little bit like upgrading the operating system on your computer. At first, you don't know quite where things are and how it works and what to do. You know, but during that transition stage, all the new pathways are being laid down. So that's what's happening really in that first 6 weeks, is your brain is changing, literally changing. You know, and they can see that, you know, if you actually do brain scans before and after having a baby, there's huge physical differences in the brain. And so if you can just really surrender to that process and allow the space for your new brain to grow and develop, then it's a really powerful thing, because then your brain is changed for the rest of your life. And, you know, I hear people talking a lot about something called postpartum depletion. And the idea that sometimes women 5 or 10 or 15 years down the track after having babies still haven't really recovered. They still don't feel energetic and strong and confident. And I'm so sure that if we could invest that first 40 days in that brain rewiring stage, you know, and really allow that process to happen, then perhaps, you know, think of what we could prevent in terms of long-term suffering, and also, you know, long-term loss of income, you know, because it's difficult to work if you've got mental health problems, you know, if you're sick. You know, and in terms of being the mum you want to be, it's really hard to be there for your children when you aren't completely put back together yourself yet.
Sure. Yeah. And so much of it, I think, has to do with taking away the expectations that we place on ourselves. Like it was interesting what you just brought up, because you said in the end it can actually save you money, or you might lose more money because you won't be able to work in the ways that you should be able to be really empowered. And yet there's this other side of it that people aren't willing to invest in that period. So it's really interesting when you can begin to switch and see, how big that impact can be. I
Yeah,
know
we
that
live in such a
sorry.
quick fix culture, don't we? You know,
Yeah.
people want it just to be able to, like, it's like fast food or something. They just want to get out of hospital 4 hours later and get back to work 6 weeks later, you know, and act as though nothing happened. But obviously when you take shortcuts like that, then in the long term you pay the price.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about food, because I know you wrote a book about postpartum nourishing recipes, right? So what kinds of food should women be eating during this 40-day period in particular?
Yeah, so food's one of my personal favorite subjects. And again, we have a lot of cultural problems around body image and around I don't know, feeling like guilty, greedy, self-indulgent. You know, so a lot of the time women, you know, literally are depriving themselves of food in those early days, or often binge eating. You know, they forget to eat all day, and then their husband gets home and they're so starving they eat like a whole packet of chocolate biscuits and, you know, 3 coffees. And, you know, so a lot of the time we're really like yo-yo about it, or yeah, so there's a lot of obviously bigger kind of body image eating disorder stuff going on too. But in traditional cultures, a woman would never cook for that first few weeks. She would have special foods prepared for her, and it's fairly universal across all cultures that the food is it's warm, it's cooked, it's soupy, it's nourishing, it's high calorie, high fat. You know, and so obviously it's a little bit different. The Chinese postpartum food is, you know, it's famous for being a little bit weird. You know, there's a lot of Chinese food. They have like chicken feet and seaweed and a lot of kind of stuff that modern women might think is a bit odd. You know, and then in India, it's more like dals and stews and rice pudding and things like that. But really, the theme is it is real comfort food. It's comfort food, and it's really that gives you that you know, feel good kind of feeling, which again is oxytocin. It's the kind of food that you'd have like if you're a kid and you're sick, and you know there's that kind of like the cliche of chicken soup for the soul, but that's exactly the kind of food that you want to be eating in those early weeks and months.
Yeah, so avoiding cold food in general, right? It's really important.
Yeah, avoiding cold food and raw food and dry food as well.
That's actually really funny that you say that, because one of my best friends just gave birth, and I've been supporting her postpartum, and her husband came home, and we were talking about how simple she's been wanting to eat lately, and how he's like, oh, it's been so boring. I've been making her these soups every day. And I asked her, what do you want to eat? And she said, I don't know, something that's not dry. Like that was the only thing she could say to him, something that's not dry. So yeah, there's some wisdom that's happening in her body right now that's, you know, even craving
totally totally. And that like boring repetitive nature, I always think that it's kind of like if you've got a lot of change going on in your life, you know, and this brain plasticity and everything's new and a bit overwhelming and you're a bit out of control and you don't really have much routine or structure, then yes, having some really grounding things like having the same kinds of food at the same kind of times, and you know, like that can really give you a lot of that earthing and that structure that can help you get through a time of you know, that otherwise can be very overwhelming.
Grounding you a bit, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to birth professionals who are supporting women postpartum? You mentioned Rite of Passage, Rite of Passages. I love that. I talk about that all the time, and how they're missing in our culture and how badly that's affecting us. So what are a couple of things that these people could do to bring back those rites of passage for women?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. Some women love ceremony. So if you've got a client who, and again, you always love conquers all, always be guided by what your client enjoys. But if your clients do enjoy kind of more ceremony, then you can do some more intricate belly binding ceremonies or closing the bones, and things like that. But for a lot of modern women, they're not really into that kind of thing. And actually all they need is acknowledgement, just simply someone saying to them. One of my favorite stories is from the Chaga tribe in Africa. And when a woman gives birth, they shave her head, after 3 months. Obviously, she's been through her sort of confinement. They shave her head and she walks down the street with her baby and they sing her warrior songs.
Wow.
And it's just so powerful. It almost makes me cry a little bit.
I know, I got chills on my,
And even just telling a mother that this is how you should be appreciated and this is how you should be feeling and this is the sort of the courage that you have and the strength that's inside you, just knowing that is enough for a lot of women. You don't necessarily need to actually shave your head.
Right.
But just being able to talk about that is can make a really huge difference, I think, to their perspective of, in our culture, I always say we're stepping out of our role because before you have children in our culture, you're a valued member of society because you can work and earn money and be flexible and do things for everyone else in the world, be independent. But then after you have children, you actually become invisible because our culture doesn't really value motherhood. So that's the opposite in traditional cultures, because almost to a detriment. If a woman didn't have children in a traditional culture, then she would be discriminated against. So, and that still happens a little bit these days. But now, rather than stepping into our role, we're stepping out of our role. So even just acknowledging that this rite of passage, just talking about these kinds of things, can make a big difference in terms of her appreciation of the work that she's doing internally and externally and for her baby and that kind of thing. So so it really depends on the client, if she's into having her belly done with henna, or there's lots of different things that you can do in terms of actual ceremonies. But for a lot of women, it's really just they want someone to acknowledge what they're feeling and what they're going through.
And maybe even just a massage, right, to put them back in their body, get that oxytocin flowing. It can be a simple ceremony in that way, where the woman doesn't feel that, oh, I'm having this weird ceremony, but she's just in a receiving mode and someone is really honoring her. That's what I think is the important part, right? Yeah,
totally. And massage is hands down my favorite postpartum therapy. I think it's I think massage is so powerful for new moms.
Yeah. So before I get to my very last question, I'd love if you could tell us how we can find you, what you have going on for both maybe mothers, new mothers, and also birth professionals. All about your offerings.
Yeah. So I have sort of a few different things, but really probably the main thing you need to know about is I've got lots and lots of free stuff. So if you go over to www.newbornmothers.com, you can download a free chapter of my recipe book. And if you're a birth professional, then I have a free guide called The Ultimate Guide to Postpartum Work. So if you're thinking about this career and you're wondering what your next steps are, it also includes some free video training. And then for mums as well, I have some free postpartum planning guides. So if you do want to write like a 4th trimester kind of plan, or if you've already had your baby, but you're feeling like, I always think it's sometimes we haven't closed the circle. If you still feel like you haven't come through the other side of that transition, even if your baby is 1 or 2 or 3 years old, or even older, but you feel like you need to explore your postpartum experience, then there's lots of free tools and courses and things for you on my website.
Beautiful. That's really interesting that you brought that up. I just want to share briefly that my daughter is 9 years old. And I recently got a postpartum closing ceremony for that birth. because I didn't know any of that back then. And I lived most of the time in Mexico, and there's an amazing woman friend of mine who I work with who does the ceremonies very traditionally, how they do them traditionally there in Mexico. And she was like, well, if you want to have another kid, why don't you just go ahead and do this? I'm like, can you do it that long, that many years later? And actually, yeah, I had some stuff to still process. It was really fascinating for me, and it really did feel like such a wonderfully a wonderful way to like start a new cycle. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I often tell people, they're like, I didn't do the 40 days, I didn't know about it, or I stuffed it up, or and I feel so much guilt and I've lost this moment. And I'm like, well, no, just do it now. And you might not have time to take 40 days out, but take a week out of your life, or even a weekend, and just spend time, doing all those oxytocin boosting things, acknowledging your journey and how far you've come, and maybe doing some healing if there's been some trauma for you. Like there's so many different things that you can do, but even just spending a week with your child, even if they're not a baby anymore, but just having that kind of focus and that intention is very powerful at any stage or age.
Yeah, that's a great point. So my last question I'm asking everyone, if you could go back in time, now that you know all that you know before you had your first child, if you could sum up one little piece of advice in just a few sentences, what would it be for that woman back then?
Yeah. Oh, it's hard to get into a few sentences, but the concept really is about information and experts. I really wish that I had known how to connect with my intuition and my body and my baby. And I wish I'd been more brave about making mistakes, because I feel like that's the more feminine way of learning. Once you let go of the books and the experts and the idea that there's right and there's wrong, it's just not that black and white. Instead, what it is messy and complicated. And if you can have the courage and confidence to just make lots and lots of small mistakes, don't get hung up on them, keep moving forward, keep learning, keep growing, and that's really the path for the entirety of motherhood. Because even when my children are teenagers, I don't have teenagers yet, so I don't know what the answers are. I'm not an expert, but instead now of turning to experts and advice, what I'll do is just be more confident that it's okay to make a few more mistakes. It's okay to just talk it through. With my kids to be happy and not to worry about getting everything right all the time.
Yeah.
And thinking that there's this like information that's going to change everything.
Right.
Yeah, because it's not linear and it's not black and white.
Exactly. It's not linear. So true. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been so lovely to talk to you, and I highly recommend everyone check out everything you have to offer. I took your free training, and I'm definitely thinking about continuing further when I'm like more stable and not traveling around. It looks like such a beautiful offer. So thank you for all the work you do, and yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. And thank you so much for putting the summit together. It'll be really exciting to see all the work you've done and all the people that you've brought together. So thanks for having me as part of that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye.